have in higher education is actually trying to work out how to actually educate people in and around this space. Because we don't actually know that someone can be or what will be entrepreneurial. We just know that people will reveal themselves in society at some future point. Now we have a little saying that we use about entrepreneurship. Anybody know who this is? Sydney Olympics. This is Marion Jones, no relation. And she's winning this 100-metre race by a lot. Right? Anyone know why it is she won this race by a lot? Drugs. Yeah, she's full of them. Right? So we say that passion leads to love, and that love leads to trouble. Right? And unfortunately, this is just the way of the world. Passion leads to love, and love leads to trouble. One of the biggest problems that entrepreneurs have is they become passionate about something to the extent that they become blindsided, and they don't want to talk to anyone about their idea because they're fearful that someone will say, "Look, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that," and more often than not, that'll lead to trouble. Because if you don't know everything you need to know about what you're doing, then you run the risk of actually getting into trouble. This is a favourite saying of mine, for a lot of reasons. I used to have it on my door when I worked. And my colleagues were confused as to why I would have such a message on my door. Entrepreneurship is the last refuge of the troublemaking individual. But it wasn't about me. It's about the way that entrepreneurs are viewed in society. The famous sociologist Weber in the 60s said that the troublemaking individuals, the stranger, will always be ridiculed by those people who want to protect the system, the status quo. 6.82% we talked about before, there's always an element of people who see the world differently and want to change it. The process is never simple or easy, because there's always more people who gain comfort from the status quo than there are from seeing things change around them. While that does change across the culture, nevertheless, there's always people who want to protect the status quo. Now this guy here, statistically speaking, this guy is the most unsuccessful baseballer that ever played. Pre-steroids, right? So not worrying about when people are all pumped up on performance-enhancing drugs. Pre-steroids, nobody has ever failed in the game of baseball more than this person. Nobody. Right? Nearly 1,000 failures, strikeouts. It's amazing, isn't it? I think somebody could stay so committed to the game while they fail to such a degree. Alternatively, this person, statistically speaking, and pre-steroids, is the most successful person that's ever played the game. Anyone want to hazard as a guess as what the difference between this guy and the other guy is? What would be the difference? What do you think? The way he holds the bat? Yeah, it could be that. What do you think? I know you're still starstruck from having come over here. What do you think? The body condition? Yeah, what do you think? Passion for the game? Passion for the game. Anyone got anything else other than technique, passion for the game, fitness? Sorry? The helmet? Yeah, it could be the helmet. What if I was to tell you that this person, Babe Ruth, is this person here, Babe Ruth? It's the same person. It's the same person. Think about it. In order to be the most successful, statistically, he actually has to also become the most unsuccessful statistically. 1,500 home runs means that you've got to have days where it rains as well. If you want to become entrepreneurial, you have to make failure your friend. There's no escaping it. You can't pretend that you can't fail. The students of UTAS get to make failure their friend. It doesn't mean that they fail the units. They just have the opportunity to fail inside the unit. And that's very difficult for some students to grasp because they've always been straight-A students. But in reality, nobody is perfect in entrepreneurship. Nobody can get it right all the time. It doesn't mean that they lose their house every single day, but they have to have that ability to be humble and to recover, and to accept that they can't control everything that's happening around them. That's it. You guys are off? That's okay. Enjoy. So there's this challenge of being humble. You can't control everything. You don't also have to bash yourself up when things go wrong. Right? Sometimes things go wrong and you can't do anything about that. So this is the type of student that we're trying to create in UTAS. I certainly love to see some of you guys coming on. I've got a rumour that there's some people headed our way. We've already got our eye on you, all right, classes. We'll be talking to you, all right? We want to create a student that's called the Regional Adventurer.
The Regional Adventurer is a graduate capable of creating their own opportunities for satisfaction. Say that again. A graduate capable of creating their own opportunities for satisfaction in any aspect of their life. It doesn't have to be business related, it could be non-business related. This type of student is created, modelled on the Regional Adventure concept that was developed at Princeton in the 60s. And it's about enabling students to become highly reflective and know themselves. I'll talk more about that as we go through. But there are 6 attributes, and so I'm going to challenge you guys now to audit yourself as learners. It doesn't have to be a higher education learner, you could have moved on from that, but yourself as learners in life. Yeah? So these are the 6 attributes, and I want to run them past you and see if you think that you're doing okay with them at the moment. Because the entire curriculum around entrepreneurship is built around these 6 specific attributes. The first attribute is that they have an ability to balance themselves between being both curious and critical, a believer and a skeptic. One of the real challenges is if I was to drop this car here, my hotel, if I was to drop it here and I said, okay, it took 0.9 of a second to get from my hand to the floor, right? So I tell you, it takes 0.9 to go from this distance to this distance. But that's true in this particular context, with this environment. But what if I stepped down onto the roof on a really windy day? Same distance, dropped it, maybe it's going to take 1.5 seconds to get there, but it's ending up over there somewhere. Your job as a student, right? Your job as a student is to always question the lecture. Never simply believe the lecture. Your job is to ask yourself, under what circumstances is this information likely to be true? Under what circumstances is this information likely not to be true? That's your job. And to the extent that you don't do that as a learner, you're actually outsourcing your learner to the lecture. And you're paying the money for it, which obviously doesn't make sense, right? So your job is to make sure that you're responsible for your learning, and that you question the information that comes your way, and you try to understand the context to when it will and won't actually apply. The second attribute is that you have the ability to develop close friendships. Close friendships through which you are able to discover the individuality of other people to the extent that there's an opportunity for your worldviews to be changed. So you may have grown up in Malaysia with a Malaysian way of viewing the world. You come to UTAS, you might be working closely with people from Europe or from Australia and other countries. And taking the opportunity to actually develop friendship with the activities that you have in class, beyond just merely knowing someone's name, but taking the time to get to know people is important, because that's how we all grow. We all grow by enriching ourselves by understanding other cultures and other contexts. The third attribute is the ability to make value judgments. It's the ability to rely on your own experience when you're making decisions, rather than defaulting to what the norms of society may be. Okay? But that's important as well. The fourth attribute is perhaps my most favourite. That's where we're dealing with ambiguity. You don't feed the students everything that they need to know. In fact, quite often we hold things back. What we really want is we want the students to actually have to work their way through the ambiguity. When you're doing something entrepreneurial in society, it's very difficult to actually know what will or won't succeed. You have to be able to cope with making decisions in the absence of full knowledge. And you have to be able to do that in good faith. So we create circumstances where you have that ambiguity. We also have
what we call an uncommon interest in the commonplace. So when we use theory, we use it in such a way that you can apply it to your life. So we don't use standardised case studies. Here's idea A, and I only want to know how idea A relates to your life, and your life, and your life. And then we'll share that so that you get introduced to other people's interpretations and contexts of those ideas. And lastly, the classes are all fun. They're very engaging, and we make it so that we can use humour as lubricant to actually get everybody feeling comfortable and actually engaged in the process. So I wonder to what extent you as a learner are able to identify with those 6 attributes, because that's how we build the curriculum around those things. It's the type of student that we're trying to create. And the reason we're trying to do that is because most of our students are too young to start a business. Not because I say so, but just because nature says so. Right? Being 22 and starting a business is tough. You've got other things happening in your life, socialising, developing friendships, and all sorts of things. Running a business is like having a child. It's 24/7 dependence that not everyone is actually ready for. And create opportunities for people to have something that's 24/7. My students know that I've just finished building a website and being monitored across a 10-day period to get traffic to that site. They cannot take their foot off the brake because they've been measured on how they improve the amount of hits they get from their particular country that they've chosen, and they find themselves being married to this thing 24/7. It drives them nuts. The reason we do it is to demonstrate that if you want to start a business, it's not 9 to 5, it's something that's there for you to go through. So the reason I make the concept is about trying to create an enterprising graduate who has the capacity for future entrepreneurial behaviour, whether that's now or sometime into the future. Now we have 4 different ways in which the curriculum is structured, and these 4 pictures represent that. The first thing is that every student in the units will have the opportunity to conceive value, to imagine something that doesn't currently exist. They'll also have the opportunity to think about how they would create that value. What would it take for that value to be created? They'll also have the opportunity to try and capture that particular value, and then an opportunity to reflect on the outcomes of their efforts to do so. We're not worried about whether they fail or succeed at that attempt. We're only interested in their ability to make sense of the attempt. Right? We can't tell people that we're going to punish them if they fail to achieve getting this value, because then clearly everyone will be risk averse. We want people to take risks and chance. We want people to imagine up here in the proper way. So essentially, the regional venture pathways set students up for one of 4 things. They may go on and be recruited as an enterprising graduate. Clearly, that's the feedback we get from the big accounting firms, is that they like to recruit graduates who have done accounting and also done entrepreneurship, because they're not recruiting the graduate because they can count numbers or because they think they've got some special talent in auditing. They recruit people based on their ability to become future consultants for the organisation, somebody who can create value for other people, for their client base. So they're looking for people with that interpersonal skill, that ability to actually see and understand value. So the entrepreneurship is something which essentially adds value to most people's areas of study. That's really the way it's developing globally, not as particularly a standalone subject, but something that adds value across a range of different subject areas. So at UTAS, you may want to become a career-minded person, and that's fine. That makes perfect sense. That's why people go to university. We give people the opportunity to graduate with some enterprising skills. Alternatively, a lot of people are inspired to do something in their local community or global community. They want to be a social entrepreneur. They help people in that space as well. Likewise, people might want to become the saviour. Starting a business is a risky thing. There's no doubt about that. Buying a business is less risky. Doesn't mean it's not risky, but it's less risky. The business has already got a track record. And so we have a focus on getting people to understand, if you had a business opportunity that you were looking at buying, how would you do that? And ultimately, wanted to start a business, that assistance is there as well. And ultimately, UTAS becomes a sandpit for students to get in and work around those particular issues. Now, I'm not going to go through this model now in any great detail, other than to say that essentially we can collapse the students' learning into one slide. And there's a lot of theory that sits behind this one slide, but let me just run through it very, very, very quickly to give you an idea of the sense-making process that we want our students to be able to do for any idea. There's 20 or so questions which fall from this process. Students got an idea, and we want to understand them, they as a resource profile. What sort of social capital do they have? Who do they know that would be of importance to developing this idea? What do they know in terms of their human capital? What expertise, industry experience do they have? That would be of value to them in terms of their idea. In terms of financial capital, we're not talking about money here, we're talking about the ability to access the resources that matter to this idea. And we're interested to know whether or not they can understand whether the idea is legitimate, in terms of does it have cognitive legitimacy, that is it a taken for granted aspect of society? Does it have socio-political legitimacy? That is, do the key stakeholders in society actually condone this particular idea, that the practices associated with this idea? So we want our students to understand this. We want them to understand the fact that change is never a present part of life. This process of variation, selection, retention rolls through. We want them to understand the type of strategies and structures that they may employ. We want them to understand how value is created. And we want them to understand how their efforts can be linked to existing efforts at the grassroots level and at the higher top-down level from government organisations, and how they can use energy to tap in. So essentially that's the framework that our students work within, and they work with it over and over and over again for various different ideas. So they get to the point where they're very, very good at simply being able to look at an idea and ask themselves a series of questions to try and make sense of what their potential is to actually move through that particular idea. So for some of the other people that we've got in the room who are interested in entrepreneurship at a more institutional level, I'm going to show you a couple of slides that relate to that as well. And hopefully we can pick up in the conversation that we have as well. This is a presentation that I gave recently at an international conference talking about entrepreneurship education, just sort of thinking about it from an overview perspective. So this symbol here relates to, it's not the Creative Commons, which it is the symbol for that, but I used it to talk about a conference challenge. So whenever this symbol comes up, I'm challenging the audience, which is you today, in terms of thinking about your own context, in terms of entrepreneurship education. And very much about this 6.82%. So I just made that up, by the way, too. That's 6.82%. That was just a number I just made up, so don't believe that. The E in the I, that when I got you guys to look into each other's eyes, the reason I did that was so that you could have a moment to reflect on how uncomfortable that made you feel. So I wonder how many of you are feeling comfortable. Right? I know you were feeling comfortable. But I wonder how comfortable you were about being 8 inches away from someone's eyes for 20 seconds. Yeah? One of the real challenges you have of being entrepreneurial is taking responsibility for things. That means that sometimes you have to sack people. It's not particularly easy to sack people. Right? They're part of your dreams in one instant, and then they fall out of that dream for a variety of reasons. If you can't look people in the eye comfortably, it's something you have to develop. If no one's going to believe you when you pitch yourself for a job interview, when you're trying to sell things, being able to look people in the eye is very important. The universal #1 predictor of entrepreneurial behaviour, the one thing that we know linked to future entrepreneurial behaviour, is confidence. If you don't have confidence, you won't act.
entrepreneurship education is very much about developing individual people and developing their confidence. And confidence, you've got something that pushes you forward. So the apple here, which is really a black apple, but it's actually a red apple, which is black today, is about that confidence to stand out on the pack. So I was asked to go to this conference and speak in the opening session on what works, why it works, and how do you know it works. And I was asked to speak on my 4 C's: conceiving, creating, capturing, and critiquing, or evidence to do so. But because I'm a bit entrepreneurial and I thought I would go against the grain, I thought we could get rid of all of that and I could talk about what doesn't work, why things are not working, and how do we know it's not working. And we can get rid of these things and we can put in a caveat, a confession, some clarity, and a call. So I'll share these things with you today and hopefully they may enlighten you. I'm going to go back on this so I can read some of these bits and pieces. In terms of a more global field for entrepreneurship. So, where do we start? Well, what doesn't work? Well, traditional focus on startups is not working anywhere globally. What we know is that only 10 to 15% of graduates all over the higher education sector. And a survey I did this on was 150 educators across 42 countries. And at conferences we get exactly the same feedback. 10 to 15% of students start a business. I think in reality, 10 to 15% of those students will start a business even if they didn't go to the entrepreneurship class. So the focus on starting a business seems to be misplaced. Developing an expectation amongst our students that there's a venture capitalist out there or an angel that will be interested in their undergraduate idea, that doesn't seem to be working either. Assuming that our students have the knowledge, time or ability or desire to complete a professional business plan, that doesn't seem to be falling into place either. Because business plans are combined, they're made up of a lot of assumptions. They can't be blind assumptions, they need to be tested and well thought through assumptions. And we're asking a lot of students to actually be able to bring those assumptions together in a proper way. Being dependent upon business schools and their values is a challenging thing for entrepreneurship education. Because business schools, by and large, universally, are about the maintenance and control of existing things. Entrepreneurship education is about the creation of that doesn't exist. So we're talking about creating things that don't exist, which is a totally different mindset. One of the challenges we have is that there isn't a lot of global unity around entrepreneurship education. Lots of different people are doing it in different ways, which is good in one sense, but it actually doesn't help us in terms of talking about what best practice might be. Why things are not working? Well, unfortunately, entrepreneurship is very rarely a planned event. It has a tempo of its own. Startups is unpredictable and slow, as we talked about at the beginning. It's very, very difficult to ask students to work through a process to start something, when in reality most startups in society are very unplanned and quite chaotic in the way they occur. Most startups commence with very little funding, so we really need to think about how we challenge students to think about a business idea that doesn't have money. Because most people start a business without money. The average amount of money spent on a business idea in America is $5,000, which is something that's within the grasp of most students, if they so wish. So allowing a student to write a business plan for an idea that needs $200,000 is quite counterproductive. In the presence of reality, 99% of business plans are moot, and students should focus on developing customers for business plans. Most business plans never see the light of day, because all those assumptions, once they hit reality, poof, they just disappear. Entrepreneurship education is very much a transformational process. It's about individual people. Business education, increasingly these days, is more a very much sort of transitional, transactional thing. So, entrepreneurship educators quite often find themselves being confident and vital. How do we know it's not working? Well, the numbers. It goes to be everywhere, is to be nowhere. One of the real big problems that entrepreneurship education has is it's hot. It's a really interesting subject. And
what we find is that governments want to get involved in this. Education partners want to get involved. The challenge is, what can we give them back? If somebody gives you something, we have to give something back. If we tie ourselves to increasing the rate of startups in society, it's going to make life very hard for ourselves. Because that's not something we can guarantee any more than we can guarantee if we had a unit called Falling in Love 101. We can't actually help people to fall in love any better than their own life experiences are going to allow them to do. How many students' projects seeking serious funding get support? We need to free them of this assumption that everything needs to find funding. We can actually help our students to actually start things without funding. Our students spend too little time talking to anticipated customers, and we need to get them out there talking to all stakeholders. Entrepreneurship education increasingly is something that happens outside of the classroom, not in the classroom. What happens in the classroom is the students demonstrate what they've been doing outside the classroom. So they demonstrate their learning in the classroom, but they learn outside the classroom. If we look at how many entrepreneurship education papers are published, there's as many entrepreneurship education papers being published as there is business education papers. The reality is there's only less than 10% entrepreneurship educators as academics out there writing those papers. So the rate of interest in pedagogy in thinking about learning entrepreneurship far outstrips that in business education in general. It's something that people are really thinking about in terms of the philosophy that's required to actually do this. There's a lot of really great work happening globally in entrepreneurship education, but the challenge is we're doing it individually. And our challenge is to actually try and find united ways to do that. When I woke up the morning that I was doing this particular talk, I was reading my newspaper, having breakfast, and I saw this particular story about all these exams that are being doctored and how teachers are sort of finding ways to convince their funding bodies that everything is all this really good. And then I turned over and I found this other story here on the free school movement, about how people can actually find a way to make it matter for their students without being worried about measure. And I thought, gee, maybe that's where we're at, maybe that's the problem we've got. So here's the caveat. Bad luck and bad timing can be overcome by persistence, resilience, talent improvement, or good luck and good timing. This is one of the really tough things that happens in this space. It really doesn't matter how persistent and how resilient you are. If you're unlucky, you're unlucky. If your timing's bad, your timing's bad. And that's a really tough thing in thinking about how we create a curriculum and how we let students progress through something. Because sometimes the cards are just stacked against you. A good friend of mine, Barry Maltz, he talks about business humility. Accept that you don't have the Midas touch, that the success is guaranteed to no one, that it's okay to fail. That way you don't have to take all the credit or all the blame. This is a very, very important thing in entrepreneurship education. Give our students the opportunity to fail, get them used to accepting that they can't control everything that's sitting in front of them. So there's a challenge for you to think about that. Could you, from an educational perspective, create a curriculum within which students could fail? Because clearly we're being brought up to think that students should succeed. So I'm not talking about failing a unit, I'm talking about failing an aspect within a unit that helps them to learn. We've got a very, very good teacher at our university called Heather Monkhouse, who's nationally recognised as a music educator. I was talking to her about failure. She said, well, I couldn't be a good teacher if I didn't get my students to fail. Because when they come in to learn to play the guitar or play some other instrument, they're hopeless. They're terrible. They have a level they aspire to, but they have to understand how bad they are in order for them to actually get moving forward. So for any of those of you who have learned a musical instrument, you might appreciate that your only ability to actually improve your performance is to embrace your failure to play at a standard that you seek to achieve. And once you can take on board your inability, you see failure as your friend. It's something that helps you to move forward. How we manage failure in our system within the lives of our students is a challenge, but I think there's a big opportunity there for us. I can't remember why I had the clock in this presentation, but it was obviously very profound. But I think I opened a conversation with them about, let's take the time to embrace our ability to get lucky or cope with getting unlucky. And it is a part of that process. I had some students recently who were engaged in a group assignment. Some students got lucky because they got into a group that was absolutely humming. It was just, the vibe was great. Other students got into a group where things just didn't work. The critical mass of those who really wanted to be involved just wasn't there. And that's part of life. Sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you get unlucky. In my confession, I wrote a book, so I have to plug that book, so there it is. And you can buy it. Lots of good places. But from this book, I've been inspired by other educators that I've come across, and some of them have introduced me to some works which are really quite profound. One of them is this guy here, Parker J. Palmer. He says, we teach who we are. Teaching cannot be reduced to technique. And I think that there's really big from an education perspective that we are all different. Our students are all different. There's a huge diversity amongst our student population.
We as educators are different. And one of the challenges we actually get is trying to find a way of managing diversity. So can we explain the causal workings of our teaching? If someone is doing great, can we explain how our curriculum has helped that to happen? Can we congratulate the entrepreneurial educators? What evidence can we find of educators working closely with their students as they innovate? We were talking about this in our session before about how we might want to think about if we could just bring the students in and provide them an opportunity to tell us how they think that they would like to learn and operate in this space. That might be a very interesting conversation to have as well. There's definitely a move afoot at the moment to try and identify best practice in a range of different subject areas. I have great fears for this because I might introduce you to something today that's best in my world that I consider best practice. But would it work in Malaysia? Would it work in Japan? The context in which best practice is born is quite often not very transferable. And I think that educators need to hold their ground and be positive about what they're doing when they're working with their students, and not give in to the assumption that there's a best practice that can come off a shelf and we can achieve something that's quality using that. A good way to protect yourself from best practice claims is to find ways to get recognised. At a local, national and international level, there are ways to become recognised, and that can actually insulate you from some of these concerns that there's a better way to do things. So, part of this confession leads on to me to introduce you to some ideas that I think are very important for entrepreneurship education, and I'll tell you why in a minute. This is John Ruskin from Sheffield many, many years ago, said these really profound words. Among all men, whether of the upper or lower orders, the differences are eternal and irreconcilable between one individual and another, born under absolutely the same conditions. One man is made of agate, another of oak, another of slate, another of clay. The education of the first is polishing, of the second is seasoning, of the third rendering, of the fourth moulding. It is of no use to seize the agate, it is vain to try to polish the slate. Students that appear before us in entrepreneurship education are so varied that trying to put them through one process is counterproductive more often than not. We have to think about this challenge, and the way I do this is to actually think that part of the curriculum development in this space is about offering choice. I don't know, if you come to Tasmania and you come to study, I don't know what it is you want to do. I haven't met you yet. So in putting together a curriculum for next year, when you may be there in my class, the only way I can safeguard you and your ambitions is to ensure that that curriculum has choice, so that your particular requirements can be fitted into the flexibility of that particular curriculum. If we've got choice and we've got freedom, then we can accommodate diversity. If we don't have choice and freedom, it makes it very difficult to accommodate the diversity which we know is ever present in our student cohorts.
I think there's a need for what I call a cry for clarity. And I had a student in one of my postgraduate classes, and he runs an emergency service. And when we went around the room, everyone's introducing themselves. Hi, I work at the CSRO, I'm a scientist, I do this, I do that. Hi, I'm this, I do that. When we got to this guy, he said, well, we're the ones who are running towards the danger when everyone else is running away from it. And I thought, gee, I don't think I've ever met anyone who can capture what it is they do as well as this guy. Every time I see an ambulance or a police car, immediately I think, that's one of his mom. Something's happening, people are running away, and their job is to get in there. And I think from an educator's perspective, that's our challenge. In this particular space, we have to find more clarity about what our claims are and actually making a very clean position about what it actually is we're attempting to do. Martin Luther King said that the function of education is to teach you. One, to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. And I think this is one of the real opportunities for entrepreneurship education. In the 60s and 70s, the whole notion of character development was quite noticeable. It's died off. But I think to actually work with you guys in a way that enables you to become that reasonable adventurer and have the opportunities for success in future life is to actually work with your character. Not what I think your character should be, but what your character could become. So I think that we're the ones who are running towards the character development when everyone else is running away from it. And I think that's one of the things that is unique about enterprise education. It's interesting, when I asked educators around the world, what do they think of this of enterprise and entrepreneurship education? I won't go into the difference between enterprise and it's a bit of semantics. Let's put it in there to keep everyone in. The 150 responses fell across 4 categories. It's what they know, so it's about content. It's how they think, it's about their mindset. It's what they do, it's about their abilities. And it's what they will do, it's about startups. And it's interesting, when I looked at where the responses fell, 7% thought it was about content, 7% thought it was about startups. And the remaining 85% thought it was about mindset and it was about their abilities. The problem is 85% of our students don't engage in startup activities. Only 15% do. So there's a non-alignment of what it is our students are doing at the university on graduation compared with where our focus is. I think there's an opportunity for us to switch that around. I think we can have 85% of our students having an opportunity to start something. And all of my students have the opportunity to start something. They may not go on to actually use it as a means to pay a mortgage, but we are blessed as a generation to have this thing called the internet. And every one of you can start a business today on the internet, today. Every one of you. You can test the water, you can test your assumptions, you can see what you can and can't do. If you don't like it, you can take it down at the end of the day. And I work with my students, we use an organisation called Weebly. I'm not sure if any of you guys come across Weebly. Free internet, you can build your own website, you can do it almost instantly. And you can get out there and you can actually be in the marketplace doing something, offering something, without having to actually go through the challenges of leasing a building and finding. But you can dream of something, you can test the assumptions, and if it doesn't work, you can pull it down. You didn't have to actually spend anything to do it. So I think entrepreneurship is very, very productive in this space. You don't have to put up with excuses for students not being able to act on their dreams. We just need to guide their dreams into a space where they can be acted upon. So, this is a call for you guys, and maybe even you guys, to step up and think about how we all might work together. It's really interesting. In our last session, we already had a couple of another educator there, and we thought, why don't we do that together? Why don't we get UTAS working with these guys and these guys? If we by Skype, we can all make that happen. And I think that there's an opportunity for us all to come up to that plane and actually work together. I've built a thing called the International Entrepreneurship Educators Guilds, where we're very interested in the input of students, educators, policymakers, governments. We try to find a range of views about what we think entrepreneurship education should be doing. We're working towards a global accreditation of entrepreneurship education, and it won't be the accreditation of practice, it will be the accreditation of a philosophy. If we can agree on a common philosophy, we can allow other people to enact that philosophy in different ways, in different spaces. But we need to agree on what entrepreneurship should be aiming to achieve. So, I think that's got us to the point where we can take some questions. Remember, you said you were going to ask me some questions.
Well, for around 10 minutes. Is there questions? Yes.
Normally, if you are probably a good bridge between what the community university and
Yeah, I think internship is a really interesting subject. I think the needs of the students should take precedence over the internship. So getting the alignment between the internship place, the students' access to mentoring, and aligning that all up is very important. We were talking in the last meeting we had about looking at potential for students that are working with their community. And I think the internship is a big part of that. Use as the students have opportunities to work. And I think that's an area that's growing, and I think it will continue to grow. Because we can't assume that everything can be learned within our walls. There are opportunities for us to connect students, but our challenge here is to come back to that same, can we facilitate the right contact between students and the things that happen outside the wall? If we get it right, the students have great opportunities to learn from potentials. The previous one? This one?
You're talking about global accreditation. So I'm just wondering, because the topic is about creativity.
Yes.
So why global?
Yeah, it's a good question. The technical answer is that there's a field called strategic management, right? And strategic management hasn't really worked, right? And strategic management are migrating across to entrepreneurship at a great rate of noise. They've already claimed entrepreneurship as their topic, their area of research. So all strategic management research now is very much focused on entrepreneurship. You look at all the strategic management journals, it's all about entrepreneurship. And strategic management educators are making the same play for entrepreneurship to be theirs. Right? So we've lost the research field, but there's an opportunity for entrepreneurship educators to attain the entrepreneurship education space. So the only way we can do that is if we find our own way of accrediting ourselves and saying this is what it is, and this university can be accredited because they are following this philosophy. They will do it differently. The practices that they use, internship, are they enacting the philosophy? And at the moment, that's what we don't have. We have general agreement about these things. A friend of mine in England has just put out a discussion paper on this very issue, which we're hoping to sort of move into a more global conversation. If we don't act as entrepreneurship educators, then strategic management folk will find a way of just washing over us, and entrepreneurship education will just become another subject area. Not a textbook that people learn about, not learn with or through or for. That's our theory.
It's very interesting that you just mentioned that, because that's what's on my mind for a while, specifically the dilution of the whole entrepreneurship education and taking it under the just a simple bridge of man. I could even say that something similar has been happening to leadership. Yes, that has also been usually taken under entrepreneurship, but it has recently taken itself into its own term. Where does leadership lie, however, in relation to entrepreneurship itself? Yeah. Because many people, including myself, believe that
That's far greater importance in the entrepreneurship field, considering that any kind of enterprise, in order to leave the realm of the sole proprietorship into an actual business, then a team has to be involved in leading that team, understanding human behavior and ownership and motivation and all that. Do you think that that group can actually come under entrepreneurship, or?
Yeah. Entrepreneurship is very broad. You can make the same argument that ethics should be across everything in university, and that I might make for entrepreneurship being across everything. In terms of leadership, we try to move away from a perhaps more traditional view of leadership as being I am charismatic, I can gain your confidence, and I can lead you right, to the promised land. We try to move back from it being purely about individuals and being leadership being about marshalling resources. So we don't want students to think, because typically what happens is a group of students come together, someone will just typically say, I'm the leader, right? So we ban that, right? So on my personal website there's a thing on there about group work, and it says if somebody steps up to be the leader, kick them out, just get rid of them, right? And everyone's given permission to sack the person who nominates themselves as the leader, right? Because the leadership has to be shared, because as you said, it's generally a team effort, more often than not that happens. So teams tend not to stay together if somebody's bossing part of them around. But ultimately, it actually ruins the focus. Focus is about marshalling resources. Entrepreneurs show leadership because they're able to get things done by being able to work with a range of different resources. Some of those resources are people at the local council, and their leadership is about gaining permission, as opposed to telling around the council what they have to do. So it's about marshalling resources rather than marshalling people. And if we think more about the resources than the people, then hopefully it sort of bypasses that problematic issue that we get, because most students in their early 20s, they haven't had the life experience to actually be mature enough to understand what it would take to lead, to cope with a person who's not coping, to alter their style, people in a different way. They just have one way. I will lead this way. I was born to be a leader. That we work with them in groups. They're the ones who annoy you. So if you come to UTAS, you've got permission to sack them if you're in one class. And they just come to me and then I deal with them, right? And we have a discussion on why do you think you got sacked? Some people are used to it. I don't know. I don't think they like my clothes or something like that. And we have that discussion and, invariably they get a choice. They can work as a group of one, or they can rejoin someone else if someone else wants them. It always sorts itself out, but sometimes it's shock when you're not believing that you thought before. So do you believe, just a little bit, do you believe that you can use the guild in order to establish this sort of like form for the entrepreneurship topics?
Yeah, it has been floating around.
Yeah, we definitely need more of this. The challenge we have is that the way entrepreneurship education is viewed in America is very different to the way it's viewed in England. Now, in England, it's very similar to Australia, and I'll put it the other way around. Australia is more common than England. We're only 10 years old, really. In Australia, there's only 3 universities in Australia that really have degree programs in entrepreneurship. And UTAS was the first to actually have a full degree in entrepreneurship. A lot of it's just elective units and other units in other universities. England have been doing it for 15 years, America have been doing it for 30 years. But in America, it takes care of itself. You go to study entrepreneurship, it doesn't really matter how you do it. If you're a bright person, there's this fantastic alumni which has money in it, and you just get connected to them, and everyone lives happily ever after. If you study entrepreneurship in England, there is no alumni. You're just a student, and you have to find a way to find the happy in yourself. By and large, in Australia, that's where we have. We have more the English model. We're not surrounded by wealth in the university in terms of alumni and experience like that. So we are more likely to work with an English knowledge base on how we're developing things than we are the American model. That's not to say that there's not stuff that flows between. But we need a global conversation which continues on, because whether it's Dominican Republic, Malaysia, Chile, Slovakia,
entrepreneurship education is in every country now. So it's not, what are the Americans doing? You know, the Slovakians, they can just do what the Slovakians do. They just need to adapt things to their world.
We have time for one more question. McCoy.
Yes. Yep.
And they went for why is the philosophy education is important for?
Well, I think if you go back to the slide, I think the 4 different types of career pathways. If you want to be, you're right, if you want to be an entrepreneur, so you decide that's it, I want to be an entrepreneur. If you don't have the support system, right, the stories of Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and all this stuff are fantastic, right? But actually, in reality, there was a tightrope that they walked. We didn't see when they fell off this way or fell off that way. They survived it, and the story looks fantastic in hindsight. Would they advise people to go to university? It would be interesting to see what they would say. I think university education is now what high school university education was 30 years ago. It's the accepted. You don't have a university education now. You're essentially like what you were 30 years ago. Right? It's just academic inflation. So it just becomes something that you have to have. Do you need a PhD? Maybe you don't. Do you need an honours or a master's? Maybe you don't. But I think everybody can benefit from working through. In England, the best support you can get as a potential entrepreneur is to be at university and be a part of method, which is the student-run, wholly student-run enterprise fund. And that particular network is fantastic at finding resources and support for students in universities who are thinking about being an entrepreneur. Not many entrepreneurs are going to pop up at 18 years old.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we'd like to invite our president from Leon, maybe some final comments. But once again, thank you on behalf of the School of Business and our university for being here. Thank you. Okay, see you again.
Good luck with your studies, and I look forward to seeing you at your test. Come and see me. As soon as you get there, come and talk to me.
Sure.
All right. Hopefully we'll see more of you there. It's a good place.